She's here.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Mallory does that. Why don't we, where are you having Sylvia right
Sylvia will be on mic 3.
Okay, and then Natalie, you sit down, then I'm going to take another picture of ice.
In September 2023, I had the opportunity to interview the renowned oceanographer Dr. Sylvia Earle. She was the inaugural climate communicator in residence at the USC Annenberg Center for Climate Journalism and Communication. We sat down and chatted about the Imperial Valley in the Annenberg Media Center's Studio B. She had a lot to say about the potential environmental impacts of the area's lithium extraction.
Well, when someone paints a picture of something that seems almost too good to be true, all my antennae start buzzing. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. And you ought to at least ask the question, what don't we know? What are we not thinking about? We can see what, in this instance, looks obvious, like what could be wrong with this picture? Then that's what we should be asking. What could be wrong with this picture? What are the consequences that we know are risky? But even more importantly, to factor in what we don't know and to realize that we don't have all the answers yet, but what we do know is that there's no free lunch, that there are trade-offs, there are costs. And looking at the source of water and the consequences of this action, this whole process, and in looking at building new devices, whether they're cell phones or car batteries or all those things that require this wondrous lightweight metal with wondrous properties that we're capitalizing on in 21st century technology. When you build, make sure that you build it so that you don't lose the use of it in a new life.
In the Imperial Valley, the direct extraction of lithium from geothermal brines will be deployed for the first time. This is a new technology. The consequences are not fully understood. The lithium will be used in car batteries, essential to reduce transportation-related CO2 emissions. But the local environment will carry the brunt of consequences of this industrial process. Are the benefits worth the cost? I'm Charles Zukoski, the Vivian Professor of Chemical Engineering and Material Science, and the previous Provost of the University of Southern California. I'm your host for Electric Futures, a podcast series exploring lesser-known stories of the energy transition from the perspectives of the people most impacted by the changes this transition will bring. This is Season 1, looking at lithium extraction in the Imperial Valley and how the transition will affect the community and climate change at large. In episode number 4, we will look at how lithium extraction in the Imperial Valley may potentially impact the environment and the health issues in the area. The question many are asking is, what will the impact be on the environment as the lithium boom is established? What health and ecological changes can the community expect? What bargain does the community accept as they venture into this natural resource extraction industry? We'll explore all of that and more. Previously, we talked about how lithium will be extracted in the Imperial Valley from a technological perspective. Now I want to revisit it in terms of the environment. The hypersalinity of the brines in the Imperial Valley has been understood for almost a century. From the late 1950s to the late 1970s, brines were brought to the surface and allowed to evaporate in shallow ponds, very much like the ponds used for lithium extraction in the Atacama Desert. In the case of the Imperial Valley, rather than seeking to concentrate a minor component, these operations were aimed at extracting major components, such as sodium chloride, which is table salt, calcium chloride, or potassium chloride. The Morton Company then sold these salts. These operations were shut down when lower-cost sources of these common salts became available. This is an example of an extraction industry that brought jobs to the valley and then left. As we talked about in a previous episode, the current technologies for extracting lithium piggyback on geothermal power production. In these processes, brines are brought to the surface, steam is produced, and then the brine is reinjected into the ground. Only a small fraction of water is lost to evaporation in this process, such that 80 to 90% of the water brought up is reinjected. The physical footprint for the facilities is modest. Thus, the geothermal power production addresses concerns of salt production through evaporation. The water table is not dropping, and the land is not devoted to shallow ponds. The direct extraction of lithium, DLE, captures the stream of cooled brine from the power plant and passes it through a step where lithium is pulled selectively from the brine before it is reinjected. Again, the water loss is small, such that the return to the aquifer is close to that pulled out. The footprint of the facility is again modest, certainly not at the scale of evaporation ponds, maybe doubling the power plant footprint. Solid wastes are produced by both the power plant and the DLE facility. Silica, iron, manganese, and zinc are precipitated from the brines either as a result of lowering the temperature and pressure of the brine used in power generation or to prepare the brine for lithium adsorption. Remember what Energy Source Materials Vice President for Government Relations, Vince Segnerati, said in the previous episode.
So instead of taking some of the silica out of the brine in order to keep the geothermal process fluid and functional, that silica removal is about 2 trucks a day, maybe 36 tons, more or less, per day. We will take 5 times that amount out of this brine. So we're going to take as many of the solids out of the brine as we possibly can to make it as compatible as we can with our Iliad technology. During that phase 1 of our process, we will also have 2 co-products, and those are manganese and zinc. So they come out with the silica and the heavy metals and all the cats and dogs. So we'll have manganese and zinc to get rid of. We hope we can sell it. We haven't yet, but we hope to.
While there is hope that there is value in these solids so that they can be used in other processes, these markets have not yet been developed, with the result that currently these solids will be landfilled. The solids from the geothermal facilities are not all hazard-free. James Blair is a professor of geography and anthropology at Cal Poly Pomona. He has recently been working as the Equity Technical Advisor for Comité Civico de Valle, based in Brawley, and he has been concerned about solids produced in the geothermal facilities and how the plants operate.
And so, it definitely is important to consider how mitigation should be required to account for, substantial risks from further spills of this, arsenic and lead containing materials, because there is still a possibility of things, not just with the direct lithium extraction, but geothermal in general, right? Blowouts and corrosion and abrasion or accidents, in addition to that scaling that we discussed. And, the scaling, and I'm not an engineer, so take this with a grain of salt, and no pun intended, but scaling limits geothermal power plant operations. And basically it has to be removed or diluted to avoid clogging the reinjection wells if the silica becomes colloidal. And so that can then also increase the use of fresh water or hydrochloric acid. Spills of the geothermal brine could also potentially impact.
In principle, waste sites for geothermal power filtrates could be environmentally risky. The solids were precipitated from a brine, and if exposed to fresh water, they could redissolve, thus producing streams of water containing heavy metals. In environmental impact statements for siting the landfill for power plant solid waste, a 50-megawatt facility in the valley is said to generate 55 to 60 tons of waste a day. That is 1.5 to 2 tractor-trailer loads. For all 10 of the Berkshire Hathaway facilities, the load is 350 to 450 tons per day, or 10 to 15 trailer truck loads. The contents of the waste are considered as non-hazardous Class II materials by California EPA standards. They are primarily silicates, iron oxides, barium sulfates and chlorides, and calcium carbonates and sulfates. Trace amounts of strontium, lead, and arsenic are present, but not at levels that make the solids hazardous. The Berkshire Hathaway Energy, BHE, non-hazardous waste site is situated in the desert to the west of Brawley. Because of the dry conditions in the valley and the reinjection of brines, on an absolute scale, geothermal energy production has a very small environmental footprint, and lithium extraction is not expected to substantially alter this footprint. Certainly in comparison to hard rock mining and evaporative brine technologies, direct extraction of lithium is a very clean way to extract lithium. LA Times columnist Sammy Roth agreed.
Totally, and not only does the Imperial Valley lithium provide us with a domestic source, as opposed to China or Australia or the Atacama Desert in Chile, but it's also seemingly one of the most environmentally friendly ways to extract lithium. I mean, as opposed to open pit mining in Australia or giant evaporation ponds in South America, this is lithium that if we can do it right, it's pretty straightforward without a lot of big environmental impact. You've already got the geothermal plants there. You might build some more of them. They don't take up a lot of space. They're not disrupting a lot of wildlife habitat. And then as you run this heated underground brine through these pipes and through the system, if you can economically just pull the lithium right out of there, that's a way to power our electric vehicles and our batteries on the grid without a lot of terrible environmental impact. And that would be great.
But Dr. Sylvia Earle told me, we don't know that for sure.
That's the cost part of the, quotes, cost-benefit ratio. And it needs to be seriously considered and given weight, and to realize what was there before, even before the current communities. What voices aren't we listening to? What have we displaced? Who have we displaced? What are the hidden costs? So easy to focus on the benefits, especially with big dollar signs associated with them. But what are the other real costs that may be even more valuable to humankind 100 years from now?
What becomes clear is that the valley currently has long-standing health issues, and there are concerns that lithium extraction could make them worse. Geothermal power generation has been part of life in the valley for 40 years. Good jobs are created and maintained by these power plants. The environmental challenges represented by DLE do not dramatically increase the environmental risk. The result has been community acceptance of the expansion of industrial activity in the valley. But still, there is skepticism voiced in the community, especially when it comes to health issues. Among them is dust. Remember, the valley is a desert. Dust is kicked up by trucks and cars on the dirt roads that lead to and from the geothermal power plants. In addition to the heat, the area has dust storms. As the Salton Sea shrinks, it exposes the lake bed and creates more dust. A 2022 study by UC Riverside found that this added dust may have caused an uptick in asthma. According to the California Department of Public Health, 16% of Imperial County residents have been diagnosed with asthma, which is substantially above the state average. Lorna Avila is a policy advocate for Comité Cívico del Valle, based in Brawley. In her role, she advocates for communities in the Imperial Valley, and they've told Comité that reducing asthma is their top concern.
I want to say it's one of the top concerns. We're always asked, what about my health? What about the asthma? It's our top concerns as it relates to the Salton Sea, as it relates to, we're also a border community as it relates to emissions coming from across the border. It's a huge concern. And we're also waiting on the health impact assessment that is supposed to be, it's said to be done by June of 2024. So we really, in that assessment, want to learn more about how it'll impact our respiratory health.
Imperial Irrigation District Environmental Project Manager Jessica Humes told me that dust mitigation is a high priority in the valley.
We're trying to do as much as possible to control dust before there is an issue. For the human health impacts, I mean, that's our big goal in terms of getting dust mitigation projects on the ground.
When we were out looking up there up against the lake, you can see where the ground is furrowed. Okay, and is that dust mitigation plants?
That is. So we call that surface roughening. That is one of our biggest projects that we do around the Salton Sea. You do have to have the right characterizations of the soil, so it needs to be a little bit higher in clay content to get those furrows established. But we've seen that in areas where we do surface roughening on the right soil conditions, that we can reduce a wind speed at surface elevation of, let's say, 25 miles per hour coming into an area down to 12. And that'll knock a lot of that dust and fine particulate matter that can cause health issues down. And then if we can couple that with vegetation establishment, it'll cover the area. You won't see that future dust.
Reducing dust levels and asthma are also concerns in the surrounding areas of Riverside and Coachella. As we talked about in a previous episode, the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability has fielded worries from residents in these areas. Hardly surprisingly, as Regional Policy Manager Mariela Leora says, residents don't want to see these health issues worsen.
They've been affected and their public health has been extremely affected because of a lot of what's happening with the Salton Sea, with the climate crisis, general air quality. There's a power plant nearby them that just got a notice of violation for the Clean Air Act. So there's like this accumulation of things that are affecting them. They have asthma-like system, like you all know all of this, it's terrible. They live it on their day-to-day life. They've been advocating for resources for over like many, many years.
So there is uncertainty. Will dust levels grow with lithium extraction? Or will it have other effects we haven't encountered yet? Slab City resident Little Dribbling Grey Wolf, who goes by Wolf, told me that citizens are concerned about how lithium extraction might affect dust issues.
There would be an environmental disaster unless they take precautions to make sure that absolutely no dust from the lithium mining is able to get into air, which is very hard out here because we have 60 to 70 mile an hour gusts that pick up tarps, pick up tanks, and I'm talking about water tanks that are empty, and will toss them 20 to 30 feet. That car cover over there, it picked it up and laid it on top of the hay bale stack way back there. He had to come back, he had to pull it off of there, and you could see how it's all bent to heck, and had to anchor it in again. But this is the type of winds that we get out here because we're in the desert. We're not in a place where we got a bunch of trees that the wind is stopped by foliage and stuff. So these farmlands out here will get polluted by the lithium dust if they're allowed to do that.
Recognizing that these concerns are important was key to the process of potentially capturing the opportunity that lithium extraction represents. The California Energy Commission has been instrumental in working with the communities in understanding that lithium extraction is an opportunity. It need not be imposed. It is one of many economic development paths that might be pursued. Thus, gaining comfort with the risks associated with this particular path is necessary for investments to be made. As Noemi Gallardo, Commissioner of the California Energy Commission, told me,
we have been trying to clarify to communities, and I also should add, we've been also working closely with the tribes out in that region, in particular Torres Martinez tribe, and the Quechan tribe were represented on the Lithium Valley Commission. The Torres Martinez tribe has been very active in wanting to determine some opportunities for themselves in the business enterprise realm. But anyways, we've been trying to clarify to them and the communities and the local government, et cetera, that Lithium Valley isn't necessarily going to happen, because I think that's important to, to go in saying this is going to happen to you versus, this is an opportunity. How can we make it happen? What are the things we need to know? What are the things that we need to prepare for? And so we've been really emphasizing that it's not necessarily going to happen. There are some key things that need to, line up before we can actually have a Lithium Valley.
Knowing that this was not going to happen to the community, but was going to be embraced because it was worthy of doing, the lithium industry has made itself available to answer questions, holding community discussions, working with the Lithium Commission and non-governmental groups to answer questions and understand the situation. Here's Berkshire Hathaway Energy Renewables CEO Alicia Knapp answering a question about the process at a California Energy Commission informal hearing in August of 2023.
So to know that we can produce lithium from the brine is one thing, but to know that we can do it in a way that's environmentally friendly and sustainable and economically feasible is another, and that's the effort that we're undertaking. And so I can't give you a likelihood of success on it because we don't have enough information yet. The stage that we are in right now is testing the technology to recover lithium from the brine, and the second stage will be then to convert that product that we're recovering into battery grade lithium products. And so we really have a lot more work to do before we can assess the level of certainty that we will be able to do that in a commercially feasible and environmentally friendly manner.
Many of the concerns would be voiced in any industrial expansion, not tied to the particular technologies or processes of direct lithium extraction. This does not diminish the concerns, but places the issues in a different category from, say, the opening of a hard rock mine where the environmental risks are substantially higher. But there's something else we have to take into consideration. The land has been occupied for thousands of years and is valued beyond what can be extracted from it as a cultural resource. In February of 2023, I visited the Imperial Valley and drove to the summit of Red Hill. We went up a road requiring four-wheel drive. The rocks are red and look burnt, in keeping with the volcanic nature of the rock. The ground is speckled with shards of black obsidian which contains white crystals. At the top, we could look north over the shoreline of the Salton Sea. In the foreground were picnic tables and a launch ramp, high and dry, with the shoreline off in the distance, a gray, salty-looking expanse of dried lake bed. The Salton Sea reflected the brilliant blue sky. Even further off in the distance were the Santa Rosa Mountains covered with snow. To the east and west, one sees mountains that show their desert origin, brown, with few splotches of green. Part of the Salton Sea Wildlife Refuge can be seen to the west. Reflections of water and shrubbery supported by the fresh water flowing into the southern end of the Salton Sea from agricultural runoff. One can easily pick out Obsidian Butte, a site sacred to the local indigenous people. The Imperial Irrigation District's Environmental Project Manager, Jessica Humes, talked about how the valley is below sea level, with the result that agricultural runoff accumulates in the Salton Sea.
What we have created as the agricultural sump is this huge wildlife refuge. We've lost marshes and other lakes or rivers, up and down the Pacific Flyway. And so the Salton Sea is one of those last stopovers for birds as they're migrating each year. Yeah, we see a ton of egrets. Right now we've had a lot of rain in the last month. And we're starting to see crickets pop up and mosquitoes. And all of those birds are loving it because that's their food source.
Jessica also discussed the endangered species living in the Salton Sea, desert pupfish.
We find them in the ephemeral washes that come into the Salton Sea. And then they also have now taken residence in the lowest portion of our drains or maybe around the rivers. But pupfish in general are found all up and down the Colorado River in different areas. So there's some in Death Valley, there's different pupfish in Arizona. So pupfish as a whole have been around historically.
In the distance to the south are green fields and low volcanic buttes. To the east is a hill with a visible ring around it showing where the water used to sit. This is Mullet Island, which housed a rookery until the water level dropped. Jessica described the result.
It's no longer a rookery, mostly though because it is no longer an island. It is actually the shoreline has receded so much that the Mullet Island is now more of like a peninsula. And we started to see raccoons, coyotes go out there, and they were just preying on the young that were out there. So we no longer see that rookery.
This is the countryside that will hold the lithium boom. A mix of receding lakeshore, volcanic buttes, agricultural land that finds rain in irrigation, and geothermal power plants that thrive on hot brines brought up from deep in the earth. But all of that has already affected wildlife in ways we might not have expected. Courtney Ann Coyle is an attorney who helps indigenous groups protect their burial grounds and sacred places throughout the state of California. She told me about how geothermal energy production has affected the area's natural ecosystem.
If you put some of these plants right next to, within hundreds of feet of a cultural feature, you're going to have noise impacts. You're going to have visual impacts. We took a member of the CEC out on field trips because that's one of the best ways to really educate folks on the places is to get out on the ground. And while we were at the top of Rock Hill, we saw coyote scat around, but we didn't see any coyotes. It's a beautiful day, blue sky, blue seas, and all of a sudden we hear some sort of alarm or noise coming out of the existing geothermal facility, and all of a sudden, in the green areas below us, all these coyotes just started howling at the alarm. And I thought to myself in that moment, I don't think if you go back in those environmental documents, if they were done even back then, that they ever considered the effect of the plant on the place, the geothermal plant on the place that they're trying to go in that way. But it was such a wonderful, example and metaphor for the problem that we really need to figure out a better way to address, because it hasn't been addressed adequately so far with those 11 plants that you were referring to that are there right now.
Courtney currently represents Carmen Lucas, a Koime Laguna Indian based on land west of the Imperial Valley in the Laguna Mountains. We'll hear more from Carmen and other indigenous leaders about their thoughts on industrial expansion in the valley in our next episode. I'll see you next time. Electric Futures is an original podcast from the University of Southern California, hosted by me, Charles Zukoski, the Vivian Professor of Chemical Engineering and Material Science and the former USC Provost. This series was executive produced by Allison Agsten, the director of USC's Annenberg Center for Climate Journalism and Communication. USC Annenberg Professor Mallory Carra is our lead producer. Natalie Lopez and Spencer Cline are our associate producers. Cindy Chai is our research assistant. This episode was directed by Mallory Carra and edited and sound designed by Spencer Cline. Electric Futures was recorded on location in Imperial Valley and in the Annenberg Media Center Studio B. Victor Figueroa, Sebastian Gruba, Matthew Buxbaum, and Tom Norris provided technical supervision. We used audio from the August 2023 California Energy Commission informal hearing, which is public record. If you'd like to read more about the topics covered in this podcast, please check out our additional resources document linked in the episode description. You'll also find that we have links to the transcripts for this episode available in English and Spanish. You can follow us on Instagram at USC_Electric Futures.